The courtroom was silent as Judge Carl Nichols sat towering behind the bench in his black robe, staring down at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett with thinly veiled contempt while C-SPAN cameras rolled live for a hearing that was about to explode far beyond anyone's expectations. Just moments earlier, Judge Nichols had delivered a pointed insult cloaked in judicial language, suggesting the Congresswoman should try understanding the law before lecturing the court, and the way he emphasized the word Congresswoman made it sound like anything but a title of respect. What followed would leave every person in that packed Washington, D.C. courtroom stunned, as Jasmine Crockett, the 43-year-old civil rights attorney, turned Texas Congresswoman, delivered a response so devastating it would be replayed across every media platform. Within hours, she was calm, poised, holding a folder thick with documents, and as the judge's arrogance simmered in, full view of the nation, she began to speak clearly and methodically laying out patterns of judicial misconduct. Without yet naming names, she cited data. She recalled courtroom interactions, she referenced transcripts, and she painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. The tension thickened when she began describing judges who dismiss attorneys based on appearance or school background, and all eyes turned to Judge Nichols, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and whispered his lawyer, who shook his head as if warning him to remain quiet. But Nichols couldn't help himself and objected mid-testimony, breaking protocol and prompting Chairman Nadler to remind him that this was not his courtroom. Yet Nichols stood anyway, launching into a monologue accusing Crockett of political theater and questioning her qualifications, all while revealing his own thin skin and lack of self-control. Crockett remained composed, and then came the moment she had prepared for with surgical precision. She opened her folder and began reading direct quotes from Judge Nichols's past courtroom's, words laced with condescension and bias, such as "young lady, perhaps you should let the adults handle the legal arguments," and "counselor, I don't need a lecture on constitutional law from someone who probably learned about the Fourth Amendment on TikTok." With each quote, the courtroom gasped, and the judge's face turned a deeper shade of red. But Crockett wasn't done. She pulled out the transcript from a civil rights case he had dismissed as frivolous, a case that led to a multi-million-dollar settlement and lasting policy reforms. She then laid down a formal petition for judicial misconduct filed with the Fifth Circuit that very morning, containing over 24 documented instances of bias supported by court records, affidavits, and recordings. It wasn't just a speech, it was a legal takedown. Judge Nichols had walked straight into a trap meticulously set by someone far more prepared than he could have imagined. Crockett then dropped the bombshell that his own clerks had anonymously posted online about his behavior, citing posts from disgruntled law school graduates who had worked under him and left disillusioned and broken. She reminded the room and the millions watching live that power without accountability breeds abuse, and that federal judges appointed for life still owe a duty to the people and to the Constitution. When Nichols tried one last time to label her actions as a witch hunt, Crockett calmly turned back to him and said, "Your Honor, the only person grandstanding today is you. I brought facts, you brought arrogance and assumptions. And in case you're still wondering about my qualifications, I've never lost a case to a judge who thought their authority came from ego instead of the Constitution." As she returned to her seat, the room erupted in applause. Nichols sat frozen, fully aware that his career had just imploded on live television. Social media platforms detonated within minutes. Crockett destroys Nichols began trending on Twitter, racking up millions of mentions, and the most viral clip was a simple exchange, Nichols sneering, "Perhaps the Congresswoman should understand the law," followed by Crockett's devastating reply, "Thank you for perfectly demonstrating exactly what I came here to testify about." That 47-second moment alone was viewed over 12 million times in 6 hours. Legal TikTok exploded, memes flooded the internet, and young lawyers hailed the moment as a masterclass in confronting institutional arrogance. What unfolded that day wasn't just a congressional hearing, it was a reckoning, and it was led by a woman who came not to play but to hold power accountable with precision, grace, and unshakable command. And it spawned thousands of reaction videos as Instagram flooded with side-by-side photos contrasting Judge Nichols' red-faced fury with Jasmine Crockett's calm, unwavering professionalism. One viral post captioned, "When you come for a civil rights attorney and she shows up with receipts," was shared by celebrities, politicians, and legal commentators across the political spectrum. Lawyers responded swiftly and overwhelmingly, with the National Bar Association issuing a powerful statement declaring that Crockett's testimony embodied the courage and professionalism our justice system desperately needs, and her documentation provided a blueprint for holding federal judges Accountable constitutional scholar Lawrence Tribe tweeted that in 4 decades of legal practice, he had rarely seen judicial arrogance so perfectly exposed, calling Crockett's performance a masterclass in legal advocacy. But the most damning response came from within the judiciary itself, as 3 federal judges privately contacted reporters to express concern about Nichols' behavior, with one judge stating anonymously that Carl had been an embarrassment to the bench for years, and what happened. Today, it was inevitable the American Bar Association soon announced it would review Judge Nichols' conduct, a rare move for a sitting federal judge, and the Federal Judicial Conference issued an unprecedented public statement expressing concern about what had transpired during the hearing. Within hours, 5 Republican senators who had voted to confirm Judge Nichols released statements distancing themselves from his behavior with Senator Lisa Murkowski remarking that no federal judge should speak to on attorney, let alone a member of Congress, in the manner we witnessed today. Democratic leadership moved swiftly with Speaker Hakeem Jeffries announcing a pending vote on a resolution calling for Judge Nichols' impeachment, declaring that federal judges must meet the highest standard of conduct, and that what was seen today was wholly unacceptable. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer took it further, calling for a comprehensive review of judicial appointments made in the final 2 years of the Trump administration, arguing that if Nichols represented the standard, other appointments might also be flawed. Within 48 hours, over 200 attorneys had filed additional complaints against Judge Nichols, swelling the original petition from 23 incidents to over 200, with many of the most damaging allegations coming from Nichols' own clerks, who spoke publicly about a toxic work environment rife with demeaning outbursts, sexist comments, and disdain for civil rights cases. One former clerk Sarah Chin, a top Yale law graduate, revealed that Nichols once told her she was too pretty to argue constitutional law and should consider family law instead. Investigative journalists quickly began combing court records and found that Nichols had dismissed civil rights cases at a rate 340% higher than the national average, while also dismissing 67% of employment discrimination cases brought by women, compared to a 23% average in his district. Major networks pounced on the story, with CNN calling it the most devastating judicial takedown in decades, while even Fox News commentator Jonathan Turley conceded that Nichols had failed the basic test of judicial temperament. MSNBC gave Crockett a primetime interview where she emphasized that the issue was far bigger than one judge asserting that the federal bench cannot be allowed to function without oversight and accountability. Late night shows joined the chorus, with Stephen Colbert joking that when you come for a civil rights attorney, you better not miss, and that Nichols didn't just miss, he fell down the stairs and landed in a pile of his own misconduct. Confrontation elevated Jasmine Crockett overnight from freshman congresswoman to national political star. Her office received an avalanche of interview requests, speaking invitations, and support from civil rights groups and legal institutions across the country. More significantly, her new influence allowed her to introduce the Judicial Accountability Act, proposing mechanisms for judicial oversight and mandatory ethics training for federal judges. The bill attracted 89 co-sponsors, including Republicans embarrassed by the Nichols debacle, with Congressman Adam Kinzinger praising her for proving that sunlight remains the best disinfectant for Judge Nichols. The consequences were swift and severe. The Judicial Conference launched a formal investigation within 72 hours, while the Fifth Circuit temporarily reassigned all civil rights cases from his docket. The Federal Bar Association voted to censure him, only the 3rd time such action had been taken against a sitting federal judge. Major law firms quietly filed motions to move their cases out as Courtroom, and Harvard Law School announced that his clash with Crockett will become a case study in a new seminar titled Judicial Ethics in the Modern Era. Even his personal life unraveled as his wife, a prominent D.C. socialite, lost invitations to political events. Their country club membership was suspended, and both his children, themselves attorneys, publicly distanced themselves from his conduct. The fallout triggered a nationwide reckoning, with judicial accountability legal scholars began scrutinizing bias within the federal courts. Civil rights organizations launched initiatives to document misconduct more systematically, and concrete reforms followed, including mandatory bias training for all federal judges and the creation of a new office to handle judicial complaints more efficiently. Law schools updated their curricula to include courtroom ethics and bias training, and the National Bar Association launched mentorship programs for young attorneys, especially women, and lawyers of color who often face discrimination in courtrooms. 6 months later, Judge Nichols quietly announced his retirement, citing a desire to spend more time with family. Widely understood as a strategic retreat to avoid impeachment Jasmine Crockett. Meanwhile, continued rising in prominence with her judicial reform legislation passing the House and gaining bipartisan traction in the Senate. She was being discussed as a future candidate for Attorney General, and more importantly, she had inspired a generation of young attorneys to speak out with reports of judicial misconduct, increasing by 200% in the months following the hearing a sign that people who once suffered in silence now felt empowered to come forward the impact of that. Singular moment when a powerful federal judge underestimated a civil rights attorney turned congresswoman reverberated through every corner of the American justice system, proving that no one, not even a lifetime appointee, is above accountability, and showing that facts preparation and moral courage remain the most powerful weapons against institutional abuse. And biased Jasmine Crockett's final reflection captured the moment perfectly when asked what gave her the strength to stand so firmly. She said, "Judge Nichols thought he could intimidate me because I was young, because I was black, because I was a woman. What he didn't realize is that those very things made me stronger, and I had been preparing for that moment my entire career. When you face bias at every level of the legal system, you learn to come armed with the truth and with receipts, and it became a national symbol of what justice can look like when the truth is spoken boldly on live television with the entire nation watching."